Morning and welcome to the 2014 Budget Committee. Any member of the public wishing to speak further regarding an issue on the 2014 Budget Committee agenda may appear before Council at its meeting on December 16, 2013 at 7 p.m. when the recommendations from this meeting will go forward for final consideration. If you wish to speak as a delegation, please sign the sheet located at the back of the room or notify the Clerk's Department no later than noon the day of the Council meeting. Any PowerPoint presentations must also be forwarded to the Clerk's Department no later than noon the day of the meeting. I do have regrets from Councillor Alan Johnson today. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? I see none. Then members of the public and members of the committee, we do have a presentation from our staff dealing with the 2014 budget book and materials, and they will also address the other reports on the agenda. So with that, we're going to go to Nancy Sully for her to do that presentation, and then we'll deal with the items 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the agenda.
Good morning. Through you, Mr. Chair, my presentation this morning will provide an overview of the 2014 capital and operating budgets. The budget process began back in June with the election of the budget chair. At that meeting, I provided an overview of the preliminary long-term financial plan as well as the forecasted operating budget. Budget guidelines adopted at that meeting were approved by Council on July the 8th and directed staff to prepare the 2014 budget with an overall property tax increase of 1.5%, and as well to use the draft capital budget and forecast as the basis for our 2014 capital budget and 10-year plan. Today marks the first opportunity for public review of the 2014 budgets. Commissioners will be presenting program budget information later this week. As well, there are 2 meetings set up for public delegations, and we have budget deliberations scheduled for December the 12th, and Council approval is targeted for December the 16th. The 2014 budget being presented today exceeds Council's target of a 1.5% overall tax increase. The tax increase that's proposed today will be lower than 1.5%. It does this while ensuring the services valued by our residents and the town's strong financial position are maintained. The budget incorporates the operating cost of completed capital projects and continues past practice of ensuring sufficient funding for infrastructure renewal. Our budget focuses on programs and the services within those programs. Emphasis has been placed on determining if outcomes are being achieved. Your budget document being released today includes Appendix 3, which includes performance measures for all 25 town programs. And included in that section are projected outcomes for 2013 as well as targeted outcomes for 2014. We have been using PB2 now for many years in preparing our budget. While it is an important part of budget development, ensuring scarce resources are allocated effectively, it is equally important to ensure the results are being used to guide strategic decisions as we move forward. During 2013, a set of key performance indicators were developed to assist town departments and the executive management team in ensuring that town programs are achieving the results desired. The information also informs strategic decisions made at the executive management level to ensure Council's strategic priorities are being achieved. During 2014, we will continue to refine our measures to ensure they provide a clear picture of results being achieved and the contribution programs make to achieving Council's strategic goals. As I mentioned, the budget being presented today exceeds the target of 1.5%. The tax levy increase for existing services is 0.82%. This is below current inflation levels. As well, the operating budget includes the impact of completed capital projects. This adds 1.7% to the tax base and includes funding for 16 new firefighters to staff Fire Station 9, the cost to operate and maintain the North Operations Depot and Fire Station, as well as funds for future repair and replacement of new facilities and infrastructure, and provides increased caravan service. Assessment growth generates new taxes without increasing tax rates. Assessment growth results from new properties added to the roll or additions or improvements to existing properties. It does not result from CVA impacts. We've assumed 0.75% assessment growth in the preparation of this budget. That was determined through information received from MPAC in the spring. The final assessment roll will be provided to the town in early December and will provide the actual assessment growth. This number will be incorporated into the recommended budget provided to the committee during deliberations. Again, the overall increase to maintain existing services and manage and operate growth required infrastructure is 1.77%. This results in a 0.7% increase on the overall tax bill, or $6.34 per $100,000 of assessment. The CAO committed to undergo a service delivery review of all town programs during 2013 and 2014. A target of $3 million was set. We achieved $1.2 million in savings as part of the 2013 budget. This left us with $1.8 million in further reductions to be achieved during 2013 and 14. During this past year, all programs underwent efficiency reviews to look at how our services are delivered. Through this process, an additional $1.6 million in permanent reductions were identified. These reductions have been incorporated into the budget being presented today. As part of the 2013 budget, tax stabilization funding was used as a temporary measure until the efficiency reductions were achieved. Based on the savings identified to date, all but $300,000 of tax stabilization funding has been removed from the budget. The remaining amount will be removed once the CAO target is achieved. This slide just highlights how we've achieved the $1.6 million in reductions. We've categorized them under two components. The first is department identified reductions, and within this section we've identified staffing efficiencies totaling $216,000. As well, there was a review done of our child minding services at community centers, resulting in the consolidation of services and savings of $48,500. $245,400 in savings has been achieved through town participation in the latest streetlight rebasing. Staff were able to renegotiate the way connections to the grid were charged in the calculations. And finally, miscellaneous savings throughout all town programs totaled $138,000. Under the corporate review section, the commissioner realignment undertaken this year has resulted in almost $320,000 in permanent savings. As well, the corporate budget for external expert and consulting fees was reduced by $250,000, and a part-time staff realignment through the budget resulted in savings of $150,600. The final $200,000 in corporate savings was achieved by recognizing increased gapping and attrition savings being achieved through the careful review of vacant positions within the town before they are filled. The efficiency review set the stage for a careful review of processes and expenditures within the town. The review has brought us close to the CAO target and also assisted in the review of all program costs during the preparation of this budget. And this has helped us bring the budget down so that we could achieve Council's guideline. The review will continue during 2014 to ensure the final savings are achieved. These savings will be identified in the 2015 budget. The capital levy was implemented by Council in 1996. It provides an important source of funding for the capital budget and is an integral part of our long-term financial plan. While it adds 1% to the tax levy, it recognizes the funding need for infrastructure renewal as well as the town share for growth-related projects. The capital gap is a growing concern not only for municipalities but also at the provincial and federal levels. With the implementation of PSAB, municipalities had to identify assets and record them at their historical value. Amortization expenses are now recorded on our financial statements. And while we are not required to budget for amortization expenses, we are required to report annually on the impact this expense would have on our budget. There is a report included on today's agenda that outlines the impact. As the report shows, the town's budget includes more funding for infrastructure renewal than our estimated amortization expenses for 2014. As a result, if the town was required to budget for amortization expenses, it would have no impact on our budget. Most municipalities do not budget at this level. The capital levy has played a large role in us achieving this. There is a growing awareness of the need to provide funding to close the infrastructure gap faced by all municipalities and levels of government. That's one of the reasons that the province has mandated that in order to receive infrastructure funding in the future, municipalities are required to have an asset management plan in place. The capital levy forms a very large component of our asset management plan, and I will speak to this a little bit more during the section on the long-term forecast. The base operating budget for the town has increased 1.77%. This is the cost of operating existing services and accommodating growth-related infrastructure. The capital levy and increased funding for road resurfacing add an additional 1.16%, bringing the town increase to 2.93%. The executive summary distributed today as part of your budget documents assumed a 1.5% increase on the region's share of the property tax bill. Based on the region's budget that was released last week, the region of Halton is now proposing an increase of 0.4%. This represents a 0% increase on their budget and a 1% increase on the police budget. This now brings the total overall property tax increase to 1.3%, or $11.85 per 100,000 of assessment. The increase may be reduced further once the final assessment growth numbers are calculated. This slide shows the proposed gross expenditures included in the 2014 budget. They total $264.1 million. This is the total cost of running the town's programs and services. The largest programs, as can be seen here, are corporate revenue and expense, followed by emergency services, infrastructure maintenance, and recreation services. Our corporate revenue and expense budget is where we budget for all of our transfers to reserves as well as our funding for the capital budget. This chart breaks down the gross expenditures by cost component rather than by program. As you can see, the largest component of our budget is personnel services and benefits at 49.8%, followed by transfers to reserves at 11.5%. The Municipal Act requires us to produce a balanced budget. This chart shows the funding sources of the $264.1 million in expenditures. The difference between specific revenue sources and gross expenditures represents the required tax levy. Based on the staff recommended budget, taxation accounts for 59.8% of overall revenues, down slightly from 2012. This is followed by fees and charges at 24.5% or $64.8 million. This chart shows how much of each $100 in taxes paid is spent on various components of the town budget. The allocation of tax dollars differs from the allocation of gross expenditures, as many of the town programs are supported partially or entirely from user fees. In light of the pressures on the 2014 budget, only requests required to meet legislation or felt to be a priority are being brought forward. Where possible, alternative funding has been used to offset the tax levy impact. During the Commissioner presentations on Thursday, they'll provide more information on each of these requests. As well, in your budget documents, there's a detailed page for each of the requests explaining the need for them. At this time, there is only one referral to the Budget Committee. This referral can be found in the overview report on today's agenda, as well as in the budget discussion document on page E15. A report addressing the referral will be highlighted during the Commissioner of Community Services presentation for consideration during deliberations on December the 12th. The overall impact of the proposed 2014 budget is 1.3%. The budget delivers on Council's priorities. It is fiscally sustainable and ensures programs and services valued by our residents are maintained, with spending reflecting the public's priorities. It also ensures sufficient funding to operate and maintain new infrastructure and provides the funding required to maintain our existing infrastructure. The budget has been laid out into two documents to assist the Budget Committee and Council in the decision process. The budget discussion document was distributed this morning and will be on the town website later today. It includes an executive summary of the budget as well as detailed program budget information, along with performance measures, information on reserves, debt, and staff complement. The document also includes the recommended 2014 capital budget. The second document, the 2014 Capital Budget and Long-Term Financial Forecast, was distributed to Council in June and posted on the town's website at that time. A report on today's agenda outlines the proposed changes to that document. An updated version with the proposed changes will be placed on the town website, and revised pages will be provided to Council. The document also includes a preliminary forecast for 2015 and 2016. This is presented as information to assist the Budget Committee and Council in looking at the current projected tax increase over the next 2 years. The projections include inflationary increases, operating impacts of the current long-term financial forecast, and do not include any service enhancements or the annualized impact of any new requests that may be approved in 2014. These will form the starting point for the 2015 budget process. This chart highlights the components making up the proposed increase for 2014, 15, and 16. For 2015 and 16, we have assumed 1% in assessment growth. And again, for 15 and 16, this will be the starting point of the budget preparation. This chart summarizes the overall tax impact for 2014, 15, and 16. The forecast increase assumes no increase in service levels beyond those implemented through the existing capital budget. The CAO and Commissioners have not recommended any new requests for 2015 and 16 at this time. Service enhancements and changes to service levels will be considered based on Council's strategic plan for the next term of Council. I thought at this point in time it would be worthwhile to just review the long-term forecast. Some of these slides were presented in June. However, the committee will be making recommendations on the forecast during their budget deliberations. As I stated in June, the 10-year capital plan is more than a list of projects to be completed over the next 10 years. It sets the financial roadmap to achieve the town's strategic goals and is an important planning tool in determining future operating budget impacts, reserve requirements, and debt levels. The plan forms the basis of the 2014 capital budget. The 10-year capital budget and financial forecast includes a projection of capital and operating needs to achieve Council's strategic priorities, recommendations for master plans, and infrastructure needs, both for renewal and for new growth. The impact of the operating costs arising from new facilities, the town's debt levels, reserves, reserve funds, and future tax requirements have also been considered. The financial plan is predicated on several policies and assumptions. It is important that we ensure our debt repayment levels remain within Council's approved guidelines. The forecast assumes we will be issuing debt for the town's contribution to the new hospital. We have ensured that our total outstanding debt to reserve ratio remains at 1-to-1 or better, as recommended by municipal debt rating agencies. This helps ensure the region's AAA credit rating is maintained. The forecast also assumes the 1% capital levy continues, as it is an important source of funding in the forecast and allows us to fund our infrastructure renewal requirements without using debt. Growth projects have been timed to reflect anticipated development and ensure the reserve funds return to a positive position by the end of the forecast. The forecast ensures it's town policy to cap DC-supported debt at 25% of average revenues. The forecast ensures this principle is maintained. And finally, funding for equipment and replacement reserves has been set at levels to ensure adequate funding to replace assets at the end of their useful life. We've divided the forecast into 5 components and prioritized projects against available funding sources. The first component, infrastructure renewal, is the cost to maintain our existing assets and is based on the town's asset management plan. Growth projects were identified in the development charge background study and are required due to population growth. Strategic priorities are initiatives to achieve Council's strategic plan, while community enhancements are improvements or enhancements not required as a result of growth, but identified by the community as desirable. And finally, our enterprise initiatives support the ongoing initiatives within the town's 3 self-supported businesses: harbors, cemeteries, and parking. This slide outlines the proposed changes to the recommended capital budget. There is a report on today's agenda providing additional information on these changes. In total, they add $146,000 to the plan. The 10-year capital forecast totals $868.3 million, of which $53.1 million is recommended for 2014. The highest spending is infrastructure renewal, followed closely by our growth projects. This slide just shows the spending by category over the 10-year period. And as you can see, our infrastructure renewal remains fairly consistent throughout the period, while our growth projects are slower in the beginning, recognizing the delay in the allocation program and increase as time goes on. Strategic initiatives are higher in the earlier years due to startup funding required for our web-based initiatives, cultural hub studies, and corporate document management. Our community enhancement projects have been slated between 2017 and 2020 based on available funding and to allow time for preliminary work to be completed. And our enterprise funding is fairly consistent over the years. This chart shows the sources of funding for all components of our 10-year forecast. The capital levy, or contribution from operating and development charges, provide the largest source of funds for the 10-year plan at 64% of total funding. Other significant sources of funding include our capital reserves, equipment reserves, and gas tax. This chart shows the projected debt charges on outstanding debt, including the anticipated debt to be issued for the hospital contribution. And as you can see from this chart, our tax-supported debt is much lower than Council's guideline of 6.25%, and our total debt is far below Council's guideline of 12%. And it's important to note that the provincial guideline is 25% of own revenues. This just shows the anticipated debt charges over the next 10 years. Our financial plan has been carefully constructed to ensure the town's debt-to-reserve ratio is maintained at 1:1 or better, as recommended by municipal debt rating agencies. As you can see here, the town remains at better than 1:1 throughout the forecast. Debt-to-reserve spikes in 2015 due to the anticipated issuance of debt for the hospital contribution. When reviewing the long-term financial plan, it is important to consider the impact capital projects will have on our operating budget. Operating impacts include the cost to staff and run facilities, drive buses, and support growth in the road and park network. This chart shows the operating impacts that are identified as part of our 10-year plan. The $2.6 million in 2014 has been included in the staff recommended budget. I mentioned earlier that infrastructure renewal and the capital gap is an increasing concern for everyone. The municipal infrastructure strategy has been developed under the Ministry of Infrastructure and sets the groundwork for a long-term cooperative effort among all three orders of government that will be required to address the challenges of our infrastructure needs. An asset management plan forms a key component of this strategy. The ministry has required municipalities to have an asset management plan in place by December 31st of this year to be eligible for funding that may become available under the strategy. Asset management plan will help guide discussion on priorities where investment is needed most. To receive fundings, municipalities will need to demonstrate that a full range of available financing and revenue generation tools have been explored. As such, financing strategies are a key component of an asset management plan and need to include the operating, capital, and future replacement cost of infrastructure. An asset management plan is a strategic document that states how assets will be managed. It describes the level of service expected from them, planned actions to ensure that our assets are providing the expected level of service, and financing strategies to implement those planned actions. The province has laid out the content that must be included in a municipality's asset management plan, and I've listed them here on this slide. The town is well positioned in planning for both the replacement of existing assets and planning for future service enhancements. The long-term financial plan presented to Council in June forms the basis of the town's asset management plan. The plan includes not only maintenance and replacement of existing assets, but also plans for expansion of assets to meet future needs. Additional information has been included in the document, including an executive summary and details on existing assets. As well, a report on today's agenda outlines the key information captured by the town in accordance with provincial requirements to help ensure our assets are maintained to meet the required level of service in the most cost-effective manner. This includes performance measures captured as part of our performance-based program-based budgeting, condition assessment information, life cycle renewal plans for asset classes, and funding strategies to ensure assets are replaced at the end of their useful life. The strategies, as outlined in the report, help ensure the town is eligible for any future funding that may become available. Our 2014 proposed capital budget totals $53.1 million. The largest component is infrastructure renewal, followed by our growth projects. The budget guidelines directed staff to prepare options on the financial impact with respect to 3 projects being added to the 2014 budget. Those projects are not included in the staff recommended budget at this time. However, there is a report on today's agenda outlining the impact of including them and whether or not there are projects in Ward 1 that could be replaced with these projects. This just shows the funding sources for our 2014 capital budget. The largest source of funding is the capital levy, which is our contribution from operating at 39.5%, followed by reserves and reserve funds. Our capital levy is the primary source of funding used to support the rehabilitation of town assets. Development charges represent the 3rd largest source of funding at $11 million and is the primary source of funding for our growth-related projects. No debt is required to fund the 2014 capital program. This shows the capital budget by program area. The largest component of the budget is infrastructure planning and improvements and includes road infrastructure improvements to service growth needs of the town and funds to rehabilitate existing infrastructure. This program includes the additional $250,000 in funding from the operating budget for road resurfacing, bringing that total program budget to just under $6.3 million. The second largest component is parks and open space at $27.6 million or 15%, or $15.3 million. This includes $3.6 million to continue the EAB program, as well as funding for parks infrastructure rehabilitation and new parks resulting from growth. This chart identifies the top 10 largest capital projects in our 2014 capital budget. And as you can see here, the largest project is our road resurfacing and preservation program, followed by EAB. As well, there's funding in there for equipment replacement and parks development. This outlines the projected reserves and reserve fund balances for 2014 based on our proposed operating and capital budgets. They are projected to total $208.6 million at the end of 2014. Overall, the town's reserves remain in a healthy position. And while our DC reserve funds are projected to be in a negative balance based on estimated revenue collections and projected expenditures for growth-related projects, our long-term financial plan has been prepared to bring them to a positive position by the end of the 10-year period. Sorry, it doesn't want to move. There is no new debt being issued to fund the 2014 capital budget. A total of $7.9 million is projected to be repaid, leaving a projected ending balance in 2014 of $47.9 million, of which 78% is self-supported and will be repaid through future development charge collections, harbor revenues, and from the Oakville Soccer Club. Several meetings have been scheduled to review the 2014 budget and allow the public opportunity to provide input. Commissioners will be presenting program budgets later this week. They will address the item referred to the Budget Committee and review the new requests. 2 meetings have been set aside for public delegations, and budget approval is targeted for December the 16th. Again, as in past years, we have provided a form to assist Council in advising staff of any proposals they wish considered as the budget is reviewed. We are asking that the form be returned by December 3rd to allow staff time to prepare it for budget deliberations. And finally, there are many ways for the public to take part in the budget process. A number of steps have been taken to ensure our residents are informed of the process and the recommended budget. Information is available on the town website. All documents will be posted there later today. As well, residents can provide input through the budget email or by making delegations to the Budget Committee. 2 budget open houses have also been scheduled to provide an informal setting for residents to ask questions or provide input. And all Budget Committee meetings are televised on Town TV. And that concludes my overview of the 2014 operating and capital budgets.
Thank you very much. I know you've got at least one question from a member of the committee. Councillor Elgar, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's a very good overview of what we hope to accomplish in 2014. I wonder if you could take me back to on your deck slide number 7. And my only reason for highlighting that is I'm afraid people may misunderstand what you have, what is written there, and maybe think about putting something in as a bit of a note.
Sure.
Where it looks like the growth is actually saving us tax dollars, whereas if you roll back to slide 6, you'll see that in fact it's growth that's driving our taxes up. I'm just afraid if somebody grabs number 7, it's, they may say, well, look, because we're growing, we're cutting our tax rate by 3/4 of a percentage point, when in fact it's absolutely not true at all.
That's very true. The growth number of 3/4 of a percent helps reduce the tax levy, but you can see here that 1.7% is added to the tax levy, and most of that is because of growth. We have to create a new fire station, hire firefighters, that's all because of growth. So it's actually costing us money.
Absolutely, but I was afraid somebody might just pick up slide 7. Total debt is one thing. Tax-supported debt is quite another thing. Would it be possible you could also provide the history of our tax-supported versus total debt? Because I remember in the last election it became an issue, and it'd be good to have all the facts out at the very beginning.
Certainly.
Instead, because total debt, everybody gets shocked, but then you find out it's actually not on the taxpayer. It's quite a good tool, I think, going forward.
Absolutely. I can do that. Our total debt is declining, though. Each year it has been going down.
Right, but it's
But
the
I'll
tax
provide
supported
both.
that everybody
Yes.
is very concerned about, if they don't understand how it works. The other thing which is kind of interesting are reserves. Also the history of reserves. In a municipality not far from here, I noticed they're bragging about a reduced tax rate going down, but when you start looking at the details, an awful lot of reserves have been drained in another municipality. Where they've taken away social welfare, child reserve funds, like they're gutting them, so there's no money in them, which obviously helps in a short-term solution, but long-term it gets worse. If you could also provide that information.
Certainly.
And I thank you for that, and I look forward to reading through this short little novel we have here before us today.
Okay.
Thanks, and I'll have more questions when we get to the actual items in the report. Thank you very much.
Any other members of the committee or council members today? Okay. Thank you very much for that. Are there any members of the public here who wish to address any of the items that are on the agenda today? Show of hands. I don't see anybody. That's fine. It wasn't intended that there be delegations today. And as stated earlier, we do have a number of delegation days and open houses, and we look forward to members of the public providing their information at that time. Members of the committee, we do have 2 consent items. Number 1 is the Municipal Act 2001 Ontario Regulation 28409 Budget Matters, and number 2 is the Town of Oakville Asset Management Plan. Mayor Burton? The 2 consent items. Councillor Elgar?
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
If that's okay. And it's on item number 2. It has to do with the fire services. And I'm just would wonder if we get a little more detailed information on the fire side, just to make sure we, the unit numbers 802 and 818. More detailed information, like, what the analysis is, why we have to replace those 2. And I'm sure it's justified, but just so everybody knows where the dollars are going. Because I don't see the vehicles like that having a high mileage. They may have high hours, they may have a bad maintenance history. It is a lot of money, and I just, if we could get more information on that.
Certainly. We'll provide the information.
Okay, and I just want to compare to other communities also.
Okay.
Like how that
Certainly.
works. Hang on. And on the next, there where you're looking at backhoes, pickup trucks and everything, like, do we sort out by piece of equipment which ones to retire? Do we look at their maintenance history?
Yes, they do. They look at the life of the asset, but they also look at the condition of it and the use of it to determine whether it needs to be replaced or not.
Would there be a corresponding sheet showing the maintenance dollars that will be reduced from the operating budget? We used to, in another company, if you were buying new, you also had to have some kind of an offsetting operating expense reduction. And I'm wondering, will that be detailed in this? Maybe it is in this book. I haven't looked yet, as to where we'll see the savings in the operating side.
Okay, I'm not sure. We can look at that, but the way we budget our maintenance expenses, we budget based on keeping our equipment in optimal condition. So we make sure that we do the maintenance as it's required, so that we keep the asset working the way it should, and then we replace it when it's end of its useful life. So we sort of budget an average amount for maintenance. It doesn't spike up and then drop down per se, but we can provide more information on that.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions on 1 or 2? Okay, all those in favor of the recommendations? That's carried, thank you. Number 3 is the overview of the 2014 operating and capital budget, and before we proceed further with the recommendation to receive that, I just wanted to clarify with our staff, there was a comment about the 0.75% growth figure that's being used, the assessment growth, and I understand we'll have an updated figure for that will likely show an improvement in that number, and we expect to see that before our deliberation day in December. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Just so that nobody's surprised when we come out with a larger than 0.75% growth number. Okay, members of committee, the overview of the 2014 operating capital budget. Somebody willing to move receipt? Councillor Lapworth. All those in favor? That's carried. Number 4, the 2014 capital budget and 10-year financial plan. Any questions? Could I have a mover to receive that, please? Mayor Burton. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much, everybody. That deals with the information and items before us today. We'll be seeing you later this week when our staff will be presenting the individual program budgets starting on Thursday on November 21st at 1:30. Thanks very much. If we are able to complete it on the 21st, the meeting on the 22nd will be canceled, so that's a meeting if required. But if we aren't finished on the 21st, we'll continue on the Friday at 9:30. Thanks very much, everybody.